Hey everybody. Today I'm going to be building out a new rack for my guitar rig based around the Helix Rack. And the goal of doing all of this is to simplify what I have to do to set up and get ready for a gig. Some of what I'm going to do I gleaned from other videos of rack builds. Some of it is stuff that I've learned and adapted to over the last few years of gigging with my current setup and sort of how I've evolved it over time. And this today will be the next step in that evolution. And some of this is just a total shot in the dark that I figured I'd just give it a try. But hopefully, some of you out there will find this helpful or at the very least interesting. So let's get started. I'm going to start with what I bring to a gig and how I utilize each piece of gear. Now, I play in a cover band, and most of our gigs are 4 hours long. And that nets out to around 45, sometimes 46, 47 songs, depending on the songs themselves. And we play a variety of music, so I have a lot of sonic territory to cover. I don't try to get an exact match to the tone of the originals that we cover, but I do try to stay true to the vibe of the original and to get within the ballpark within some margin of error. So my rig has evolved to basically balance out sonic flexibility with minimizing the amount of gear and amount of setup time that I need. And so here's what I bring to a gig these days. I usually bring 2 guitars to a gig. And my main guitar that I gig with is my James Tyler Variax, the purple one on the wall there. I use that to get my acoustic tones, all of my single coil tones, and even some of the humbucker tones when it's not really feasible for me to switch guitars between songs or parts of a song. For a second guitar, I often switch it up depending on sort of my mood or maybe the set list that we have going on, but I'll bring something to get a heavier rock sound. More often than not, that's going to be one of my EVH Wolfgangs. I have 2, and I love these guitars. They feel great, they play great, they sound great. They definitely have become my favorite hard rock sound guitar to play. If they had single coils on them, I would probably play them most all of the time. Now, my guitars need to be wireless. I move around on stage a lot when I'm not singing, and I've even been known to jump down into the audience to do some playing and stuff, depending on the energy of the room. So I definitely need wireless. So for my wireless, I actually have 2 body packs, but I almost always just play with one. I leave it just in my pocket or in the back of my pants, and I plug and unplug as I switch guitars. Just as if it were a cable running the amp. The second body pack I sort of just save for in case something goes wrong with the first. It's there as a backup.
So, there's a single Shure GLXD wireless receiver as the starting point for my signal chain. Next, guitar effects. There's 2 pieces of gear that I have to have, and those are the Line 6 Helix and my Dunlop Talkbox. The Helix is the main generator of all of my guitar tone, including amp models, effects, and even routing. Maybe I'll do another video on my signal path and how I've been able to whittle it down now to just a single preset with multiple snapshots that gets me through the whole night. But that's too much to go over in this video, so let me know in the comments if you're interested in something like that. So for the Helix, I take the Helix Rack and foot controller to gigs to help minimize my cable and power needs at the pedal board, also to protect my vestment against beer spills and people stomping on it and such. Some of the bars we play in are pretty tight spaces, so it's a legit concern. For outboard effects, it's really just the talkbox, so I need to run cables to my pedal board for that. I've tried getting by playing Sweet Emotion with just a wah pedal, and no, that does not cut it. So we gotta have the talkbox. Connection-wise, I go direct out of the Helix XLR output to the front of house, and I also use one of the sends to send my acoustic tone that's coming from the Variax out to a DI box, which then also goes to the front of the house on a separate feed. With two separate feeds, then the sound engineer can mix them separately with different EQs, different levels, mix with monitor feeds, etc. independently. And then I don't have to worry about changing anything in my rig to accommodate any of those specifics. It's way easier than any other option I've found for adding in an acoustic guitar. Next up is my guitar amp. So in addition to sending feeds to the front of the house, I do also use the 1/4-inch output from the Helix to feed a stage amp. Why? Well, it balances the sound better with the other guitar player who still uses a pedal board and an amp. Now, because he has an amp on stage, it doesn't sound balanced and it doesn't sound right in the room overall if I'm only going through the PA. So I bring an amp also. Plus, I really do like the sound and it looks cool on stage. So I have a few amps to choose from, but mostly I take my Fender Bassbreaker 15 watt and I have a matching extension cab for it, so the two of them are stacked together on the stage with me. It looks really great. It works for all of my tones. It's a pretty transparent amp if you keep the EQ set neutral. And it's not overwhelmingly large. It's easy enough to tote around. It's also versatile enough that if something does go wrong with the Helix, then I can get by with just that amp to finish the gig. Now, I haven't needed to do that so far, but it's good to have a backup plan. Vocals. I have a wireless mic rig that I bring for both myself and our lead singer, who is also my wife, and therefore relies on me to handle all the equipment needs. Now, we use the Shure GLX-D systems. And for my vocals, I also have an effects processor for EQing my voice and just a tiny bit of doubling that I put in there. And I get that from a TC Helicon unit right now. My wife doesn't need that support. She sounds great. I need the help, so that's what I go with. That means there's two cables out to the front of house carrying the vocals from my rig. And sometimes I go wired on my mic, so that's another cable that I have to run to the front of the stage. Next up, in-ear monitors. Now, in the same wireless rig as the vocal stuff, I also have a wireless in-ear monitor system that transmits monitor mixes for both my wife and myself. That's an additional 2 cables from the front of the house to my rig for that.
That's what I'm rolling with today. Now, here are the changes that I want to make with this build that we're going to do. Number 1, I want to collapse to a single rack box and get one with casters so that I can roll it in and out of gigs. I'm kind of tired of carrying those 2 heavy cases around. Second, I want to switch to make my mic wired all of the time. I don't really need a wireless mic, with one exception. I've got a guitar while I'm singing, so there's really no need for me to have a wireless mic. Having that extra transmitter and receiver going is extra frequency collisions that just aren't needed. So I'm going to eliminate that from my rig. Number 3, I want to minimize my setup and teardown time. And I want to key in on the number of cable runs that I have to do. Right now it takes me almost as long to set up everything as it does our drummer. And when we go to a gig, the other guitar player in the band, the bass player in the band, they show up, you know, they set up their amps, their pedal boards, turn on, and they start tuning up, and I'm still taping wires to the floor and everything, so I have got to get rid of all of the extra tasks that I have to do and really minimize those things. And finally, I want to eliminate any fragility in my system that's reasonable for me to eliminate. One of the things that I want to do is to build a patch panel. So one of the other videos that I watched was by Jamie Trevino. Jamie, thank you. Your video was very helpful. He goes by the name The Law. You may have seen his video. But he had a great idea for a patch panel. I loved it. I was like, man, I'm totally building one of those. So I'm definitely building one of those with this build out today. But Jamie, you get full credit. Thanks. So that's the overall idea. That's what I'm going to go with. And the idea is to turn this into this. And I'm going to do that by moving the gear that's in these over to this. Now, let's head out to the workspace and we'll get started.
So here's the equipment we'll be using to complete the build for this upgrade. I'm starting with a 12 rack unit road case from OSP on heavy duty casters. It's the shallow one, but that's deep enough for everything that I'm going to be putting in it. This one also has a foam layer surrounding the edge where the rack rails go on, and that reduces road vibrations and other wear and tear things that might add up on your gear. Now that's probably overkill for my needs because we don't tour outside of the Seattle area, but it's still peace of mind. I'm going to move over all of the equipment that I use from my 2 separate racks into this new rack. And I'm also adding a 3 rack unit drawer to hold cables, adapters, and whatever else I need to. And having that handy right there should also help me speed things up before and after a show when I'm moving equipment around. Now, as I mentioned, I'm building a patch panel, so I'm going to use this 16 space 2 rack unit blank panel. And for that panel, I've got locking TRS jack pass-throughs for my 1/4 inch cables. I've got XLR jack pass-throughs for the XLR cables. I've got an Ethercon jack for the Helix foot controller, a USB jack for connecting my laptop to the Helix. I've got some labels that I got from Redco to keep things organized and tidy. There's numerous patch cables I'll be using to keep my wiring short and organized on the inside of the case. And I'm also going to be building a pedal board snake so I can combine all of the cables into one using a pedal python kit. And for that snake, I'll need a send and return TS instrument cable to go out and back for the talk box. I need a mic cable for my wired vocal mic. Another XLR cable that'll run out for a floor wedge if I want one in addition to or instead of my in-ear monitors. This, by the way, is another idea I got from Jamie and his patch panel, so thanks again, Jamie. Also an Ethercon cable for the foot controller, and an extension cord to get power out to my talk box and to the floor wedge if I need to, because there isn't always power at the front of the stage. And finally, caffeine. Lots of caffeine. And now that we have everything in order, let's get started.
So to build out the patch panel, first thing I did was figure out what sort of layout I want, and I did that based on where I want to pull snakes from, and I don't want wires crossing over each other. These 5 will run to my pedal board and mic stand up front. These 4 here are audio outs that go to inputs on the front of house. And these 2 are channels for my in-ear monitors. And those are coming from the front of house over to here. Now I could combine those into one snake, but honestly I couldn't find a good prefab snake that had 6 channels. I could find them in 8. I could find them in 4s and 12s and everything else, but I did find a good 2-channel one, and I already have a 4-channel one that fits, that's about the right length for me. So I went with that. And then this is going to be a USB jack to go into the Helix, and this is going to be running to my stage amp. So this is just a single cable coming out. And so that's how we're going to do the patch panel. All of these items are basically just pass-through jacks. These are clearly for XLR. This one is a USB, and it's actually reversible. And so it's good that it's reversible because I actually need this side facing out. And you can take out these 2 screws, pull this out, turn it around, put screws back in. So that's what I'll be doing. For the foot controller, I got this Ethercon port, which just has an Ethernet jack on the back and the full Ethercon interface on the front. So we'll be using that. And then from Redco Audio, I got these little labels. They're plastic labels, and I thought that would look nicer than either just pieces of tape or whatever.
and honestly they weren't all that expensive. And then I got a couple of blank plates to cover up the ones that I'm not using. So I'm going to build this out and I'll be back with the results. All right, finished the patch panel build out. Got all of the pieces in there, the blank plates. I'm an idiot and forgot to order a label for this one. This is my send to the stage amp. I'll order another label another time, but other than that, I think it came out. A couple things that I learned along the way. These tiny little nuts are really hard to get on there, and up against the edges you can see like human hands just are not made to get in there. So make sure you've got some needle nose pliers that you can use to try to feed those nuts on there to fasten. But everything is kind of locked down and good to go. So the patch panel is ready, and now we can do the install. So I'm doing the disassembly of the of my vocal rack, and looking in the back here, you can see it's pretty simple. I've got some wireless units for mics, and this is a wireless in-ear system. Those are all from Shure. The other thing that I have is kind of my secret weapon in the back of this rack here is there's a shelf, and I've mounted a TC Helicon Voice Live Play unit in here. It is MIDI controllable. I don't really use that right now. I just leave it on a consistent setting, but it gives a nice EQ, and I use just a tiny little touch of a chorusing or doubling to my voice, so it gives me a very consistent sound from gig to gig, and I don't have to worry about differences in reverbs that are on the boards or whatever. And so that's one of my secrets that I have for there. But all this is coming out, so I just kind of have to disconnect back here and then get ready to go. Whenever you're putting gear into or taking gear out of a rack, if you set it so that the items hang vertically, then you're not putting any strain on the lips that hang over the edges here and hold the units in. You can get them seated evenly with all 4 screws, so there's not extra strain being put on anywhere. It's something I always do. Also, I never use a drill screwdriver on these, because if you end up stripping these holes out, you're kind of screwed. You got to get a whole new rail. And in some cases, the rail's built into the rack, and then you're doubly screwed, because you got to get a whole new rack. So we'll just zip through this real quick, and then we'll move on to the other rack. So all that's left in this rack now is the Furman power conditioner, and I've got the exact same one in there, and I won't need 2 in the new unit, so I'm just going to leave this here for now. Okay, and here's my guitar rack, getting ready to disassemble this. So just a couple things I wanted to point out, that what I'm doing on the inside of the rack here is I have my Shure wireless receiver here. It's mounted permanently inside this rack on the shelf, and that just goes straight out of there into the input on the front side of the Helix. Also coming out of the Helix in one of the sends, this is a way I have 2 separate outputs, one for electric guitar that I can do in stereo if I want, and then a separate send that I have for the acoustic sounds in my patch, just so whoever is running the board can control the acoustic volume independently of the electric volume. And so I just have a patch cable running into this DI box, and then DI out to the board. So let's get this apart So you may be wondering why I'm using this and not a drill even to take them out. The reason is I don't like the risk of the drill slipping off because it comes off one of these things. I definitely don't want to damage the front of the Helix. So I always just use this. It takes a little bit longer, but it's not that big of a deal. And it's just the time saving is not worth the risk to me. All right, I'm gonna leave both of these hanging in here for now because there's no need for me to kind of set them on the ground, and we'll get ready to put them in the new rack. So here we've got all the items sort of laid out in the rack, and I usually don't screw anything in until I'm kind of satisfied with where I have the layout. In this case, most things are pretty much set, and there's a couple rules I'm following. One, I like the power conditioner at the top for two reasons. One is because these lights that slide out here illuminate the rest of what's down here, and you can't really turn them over and shine up. That's not helpful. So power conditioner needs to go at the top. The other reason is having all the plugs available at the top makes it easy to plug in additional stuff if I need to from behind without there being any sort of cables laying over the top of it coming down from the patch panel or anything like that. Other rules, one is I like to leave a space between the power conditioner and the electronics, just because if you're right up against this, you are increasing the probability that you can get a little bit of noise introduced just from the power. And then the final rule that I'm following is I want the heavy stuff at the bottom of the rack, particularly when you've got a rack with big casters. It's great for rolling, but it also is very susceptible to tipping over if particularly you take one of the sides off and then don't kind of steady it until you get the other side off, then the weight balance is thrown off. And having the heavier stuff at the bottom sort of keeps the center of gravity lower and doesn't eliminate, but it reduces that. So I'm going to go ahead and fasten these things in. I've got the drawer and the Helix set where I want them. I know I want the power conditioner at the top. The question is just where in here do I want to put the other stuff? So we'll figure that out. So we'll just kind of zip through this part. So there we go. Front side's all good to go. So let's flip this around. So here we are, the back of the unit. And I'm going to try to see if I can make sure you're getting a good shot of this. So here's the back of my in-ears transmitter. And Helix is down here. And I knew I wanted the patch panel kind of offset from where the back of the Helix is. And the reason is that as cool as this patch panel is and as handy as it is, by having these types of connectors as opposed to the kind where you solder the wires on and make your own cables, I hate making my own cables. It's just a pain in the ass. It's not something I find enjoyable. So I went with these, but I knew that these would stick out further, and I can't mount it down here where the Helix is because there's no clearance to plug anything in here. So what this means is with this
panel, I need to mount it above where the Helix is, just so I've got the clearance behind here to plug the cables in. And that essentially means that if I want to mount this tray here that has my pedals on it, and basically it's only going to have the vocal pedal, and I'm going to mount the other shelf that I had with the direct box on it. If I wanted that in the back like I had it before, it would have to be like way up here, and there wouldn't be any room for the direct box because it's going to end up behind this in-ear unit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mount this in the front and put it just above the Helix. So I'll be redoing that, reconfiguring this shelf, and then we'll get the patch panel installed. So I'll get all that done and we'll come back. Okay, made the adjustments on the front. I moved this blank unit up a little bit, and I mounted the shelf in this unit here. So there's an opening here, which is totally fine. It works for what I need to get the cable out. There's not too big of an opening where like stuff's gonna get in there. I don't know what will get in there, but just in case. So that means we now have space in the back. So you can see here's my voice pedal. Here's my DI box that I now moved around for the install there. And we've got room out of the way. Got room to put the patch panel right here. Potentially, no, I think I want it here. Just like that. So that's where we're going to put that, and then we'll be able to wire it up, get all the wires cleaned up, and I'll come back and show you how that looks. Okay, so the patch panel is all wired up now. I've got the cables tucked away and anchored down. Everything's sort of routed around. So I'm going to go through the connections with you real quick here. These are send and return to my pedal board, which will be up the front. And they're connected on the back side into the effects loop 1 in the Helix. This is the foot controller wired into the Helix. This is my microphone input. So again, coming from the front of the stage, this will connect to here. It goes from here into my voice effects unit, and then out of the effects unit over to microphone 2 here. And then this will be a snake to the front of house. I'll get to the monitor out in just a moment. This is the send to my amplifier for the stage. So this comes out of the 1/4 inch output of the Helix, and then this will connect directly to the input of my amp. This is a USB port, which is now wired down here, here to the back of the Helix. This is the electric guitar output, and that comes out of the XLR output on the back of the Helix, and this will go to front of house mixer. The acoustic output comes from the direct box, and that direct box feed comes from send 2 on the back of the Helix. That's how I have my patches set up to send my acoustic signal out. And then microphone 1 is wireless microphone, so that's coming direct out of the wireless unit output to here. And so this will all go to front of house.
And then from the front of house, we'll take in-ear mix. I have 2 channels, and that's wired to the inputs of my in-ear transmitter. And then I've got a pass-through on one of the channels. So for channel 2, the pass-through from there comes out of that unit and feeds the monitor output, which goes to the front of the stage for me. And so that's kind of how all that's wired up. The in-ear, I've got a snake cable for that, which is right here. And so this will connect here. Red and blue will match. So these will go like this. And this will be my in-ear feed from the front of house. So there's one snake. I have another snake that's a 4-channel snake that has red, white, yellow, and blue leads, and those are all color coordinated. So that will also go to a stage snake from the front of house. And then these 5, along with the power cable that I'll wire into here, will form a snake that goes to the front of the stage for me. So that's how that goes. All I have left to do is wire up the power and get all of that routed for all of these items in here. And then we're good to go. I think we're done. So I'll come back once all that's done and kind of show you the finished product. And here's the finished product. I hooked up my light here, so I've also got light behind me. If I have to come around to the back and do something, or I'm trying to see, don't have to get my phone out and try to use that for a flashlight. But all the routing is in place. All of this is hooked up. All the power is now in place and on. And there's a look from the front. Everything's powered on, working, connected up. New rack is complete.
All right, so that's the build out for today. Hope you guys had fun. Hope you enjoyed, or at least found this interesting. And thanks very much for watching. See you next time.